The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from Amsterdam and across the world online. You're now watching The More Show and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined with my guest, Dr. Lance Secretin. Now Lance is widely acknowledged as one of the most insightful and provocative leadership teachers of our time. He is the former CEO of a Fortune 100 company, university professor, award-winning columnist and author of 15 books about inspiration and leadership. Now he is a thought leader whose teachings and writings on conscious leadership are courageous, radical and ingenious, and have been hailed as among the top most original, authentic and effective contributions to leadership thinking currently available. Dr. Lance Secretin, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you just bearing with us there. Well, we just had a few issues at my end, which is just typical. Okay, so today we're going to talk about two of your books, which is A Love Story and The Spark, the Flame and the Torch. I want to know a bit of backstory about you as well, but just to begin with, which one came first, The Spark, the Flame and the Torch, or A Love Story? Which one was first?
The first of those was The Spark, the Flame and the Torch, which was my 15th book, and A Love Story is number 16.
Right, okay. Now, had your wife passed at the time when writing The Spark, the Flame and the Torch?
Say the question again?
Had your wife passed at the time of...
No. No, she had not.
No, right, okay. Because I'm guessing that A Love Story was... it's not, would you say, as one of the books that you would normally do?
Of course. My books have really all been about leadership and running inspiring organizations, and The Love Story is a memoir and a poetry book.
Right, okay. Well, let's just get a bit of... in a nutshell, okay, so you kind of touched upon it there, but if you could summarize what it is you do and what makes you different.
Well, my work is about creating inspiring organizations. I started Manpower in the UK, and we built that business to a very successful organization with 72,000 employees. And I left there and I started teaching at the university back in Canada. And I started writing leadership books, and pretty soon companies wanted me to come and consult with them, so I ended up pretty well abandoning my university life and becoming a full-time coach, mentor, advisor to leaders, and introducing transformational programs that would help companies become inspiring.
Right. When you say you started Manpower, I mean, I'm in Amsterdam and we have Manpower here. I'm from the UK, but I mean, I know what Manpower is. Right. Were you one of the founders, or did you work for them to bring them to the success?
Well, I was the CEO, but at the time there wasn't anything in the UK, so I was responsible for the UK, Middle East, and Ireland, and we built a whole business from scratch. Wow.
Okay, so you walked away there with, I suppose, an ability then to do that which you want. I suppose, you must have walked away with a good package from that experience. Yeah. And do you think that allowed you to sort of then go into the direction that you did by having that behind you?
I think it did. Yes, I think it did. I wrote a book about the experience of building this amazing company, and it was called Managerial Moxie. And that was a book that actually then went to the bestseller list and became very popular, and that's why I ended up in the consulting business.
Right, yes. And you ended up in Canada where you are now.
Yes.
Why
Right.
Canada?
I am a Canadian.
Okay.
So I lived in England for 14 years, but I'm a Canadian, so I came back to Canada after my stint in the UK with Manpower.
Right. Yeah. With your accent, it doesn't actually sound. I can't. The American tin here. The American accent's not quite there. I don't think. Yeah. I think you've travelled quite a bit.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I can tell that. You tend to lose your dialect sometimes, don't you, when that happens? And you're like,
yeah, be a bit of a mongrel, I guess.
Where am I from? Where is home? Yeah, absolutely.
The world.
Yeah. Okay, so you've proven to yourself quite a bit, and you've been able. You've shown yourself really the law of attraction as well, in a sense, and how that works. But how does a CEO become as conscious as you are then? Because you're very much into consciousness.
Well, I think that I look back on our experience at Manpower. I had a boss before I was at Manpower who was what I often refer to as the boss from hell. And when I came to England, I was only 27 years old, so I didn't know anything about running a business. So they'd asked me to come over here and do it, and actually gave me a very short assignment. It was meant to be just something to get something going, and then I'd leave. But what happened was that I decided all the things that hadn't worked with my boss from hell, I'd just do the opposite. And the opposite worked beautifully. And that's really been a mantra for me a lot of the time. If you see something that isn't working, just do the opposite.
If you see something that isn't working, just do the opposite. Well, that's interesting. And do you think that you were meant to have that experience with that boss from hell for you to have that truth?
Well, it works out that way, doesn't it? Serendipitously, things turned out that way. The flame part of the spark of flame and the torch is a perfect example of that. But let me explain the book quickly. The idea is that leadership is really broken and that we need to really focus on inspiration, not leadership. We need to be inspired, and we want to be inspired everywhere, not just in the corporate world, but elsewhere. And the spark of flame and the torch talks about how we do that. The spark is about filling up our own tanks and becoming inspired ourselves, because you can't inspire other people unless you're inspired. And the flame is then, once your tank is full, how do you inspire others? And the torch is inspiring the world. Now, the flame part is a good example of what I was just saying. We looked at some research that we had done that showed that what people did not like about leaders was they didn't like cowards, they didn't like people who were phony, they didn't like people who were selfish, they didn't like people who lied, they didn't like people who ruled with fear, and they didn't like idiots. So those 6 criteria were what they didn't like, and that sort of looks like 60% of leaders. We said, well, then why don't we just do the opposite? And the opposite is courage, authenticity, service, truthfulness, love, and effectiveness. That spells an acronym of CASTLE, and therefore that's known as the CASTLE principles. And if you live those 6 principles, you will be an inspiring leader who inspires others, because we love people who are courageous, we love people who are authentic, we love people who serve others, who tell the truth, who are loving and effective.
I mean, is someone that's doing something that's not enjoying it being of service?
I think not, because I think you're inauthentic. When you're doing that, it's not something you love, it's not something that brings you joy, and therefore you're not likely to do it well. You know, I often use a metaphor of a guy who stands at the baseline in tennis and says, now, I need to make this shot because it'll make me $100,000. I don't think they'll make a great shot. But if they say, I want to play the best tennis in my life, they'll make a great shot. And then, of course, they'll make $100,000. So it's which comes first. People who do things because they're inspired and because they love what they do and that because it serves others, they do well.
Do you think it always feels like that? Because some of the things that I do, and I'm sure other people do, it doesn't always, even though you're trying to do it because it's the closest thing that you would do to enjoy, but not all the time does it feel like that fulfilling, because, there's other things you have to do to make that work, and it's not always 100% that feeling.
Well, we make our own reality. So we can settle for that if we like, but we can also change it. I mean, imagine this picture. This is, of course, a silly fantasy, but imagine this picture. Supposing we took all of the working people, let's say in the whole world, and we said, let's just stop the music for a moment. Everybody just stop exactly where you are, and we would like you to do the work that inspires you. So move to another place, another position, or another, we start the music again, but this time everybody will be working in the right place, doing work that inspires them. Can you imagine how that would change the world? Even if we did this in a department or in a particular company, or even in your family. There are so many people today who are doing things that, for the reasons you mentioned, for money or to make ends meet or pay their mortgage or get their kids through school or whatever it is, all wrong reasons. And therefore, they're not inspiring, they're not serving. And life for them is basically, how do I get through this so I can get all these onerous burdens done? Then maybe one day I'll be able to do what I want. Of course, the horizon never comes.
The horizon never comes. But what if you don't know what it is that you really want to do, and yet you're just doing that which you felt was the right thing to do to begin with, yet it's not entirely that feeling, yet it's just better than saying, well, I don't know what it is that would inspire me. At least you're doing something.
Well, the spark, the flame, and the torch, the spark part, has a section in it which identifies how to find our calling. And it is about finding your calling. And the calling is a description of the things that you do and the gifts that you have, which are unique to you, and how you use them to serve the world. So it's the intersection between your gifts and talents and the world's needs.
Absolutely. But sometimes the things that we do don't always bring the wealth that we really crave for, yet we kind of enjoy doing it, but the money's just never shows up. So you tend to shift your focus then and say, right, well, I'm not here just to live in poverty. Forget that. Yes, I've been doing what I've enjoyed doing, but it's just not going to break the bank. It's not going to provide what I want, the reality that I want. So I'm going to have to shift it and make some changes.
Yeah, that's just a lack of imagination, isn't it? I remember making a speech once at a conference, and there was another speaker there. He had a grand piano. He was a concert pianist, and he sat down and he played a piece by Liszt. And he got up and spoke to the audience. He was wearing a tux, and he said to the audience, that was a piece written by Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was a genius. He played so quickly that at the time there was no piano made that could keep up with him. So entrepreneurs at the time invented a machine that would then be arranged mechanically in such a way that it would accommodate the gifts and genius of Franz Liszt. That's how we got the piano, known then as the pianoforte. And he said this is an example of how entrepreneurs catch up with genius in the marketplace. And then he went and sat down again and played another piece. Now, what he was doing was following his passion and his gifts, which was music, and applying it to business education, which was lucrative, therefore meeting both the calling that he had inside and the world's needs. This is a piece of imagination.
Now that's interesting. Now that's interesting what you've just said there. Now that makes a lot of sense, what you've said there, both spiritually and mentally as well. Okay then, well, I'll let me say something here that might help others out there just to get into this conversation that we're having. Okay, so what I'm doing as well, I'm about to start off a psychic service, providing psychic phone numbers and everything, because that's one thing I've realized would work to sell back to the audience that I've got. And that's me providing a service of free content to people, with these great interviews with people like yourself. But then also on the other hand, it's also, there's a business model in the background that I'm going to be building as well. That's going to come from a different space. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And if there's a market there, then you've closed the loops, haven't you?
Well, there's only a market because I'm not getting on any Tom, Dick and Harry psychic. Every single psychic that's going to be on my network will be coming on for an interview, and through their transparency of the interview will be the resonation with people out there. Does this person resonate with me, and do I want to read it with them? They're not, they've got the option to have that clarification with their own inner sense before they just phone up some random line. Yeah. So.
Fantastic.
But
I wish you well with it. I hope it's very successful.
Well, thank you. No, well, that's just one thing, and there's many other things that I'm working on. So I'm saying these things to show transparency in what I'm doing, to kind of lock into what you're saying, so that other people can resonate with another way that they may come up with it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's interesting what you've got to say there. That really is like an aha moment a little bit, what you've just said there. I mean, you probably say this so many times in interviews, but I appreciate what you've just said there. Just going back as well, where is all this in-depth consciousness coming for you? You didn't really answer that. I'm intrigued by you. What material have you studied? Have you had your own aha moments yourself? Have you been meditating and there's been something coming back to you? Where have you got your truths from?
Well, I'm a curious person. I'm very pragmatic, too, so I look at stuff, especially within the corporate world, which is where my specialty is, because that's where I came from, and I wonder why we're doing things in such a goofy way. And so I want to know, is there a better way? And part of what you were saying earlier about, the luxury I have to leave Manpower and then start experimenting in my sort of global lab, as it were, with real businesses, is to find out, why do you keep doing that? Why don't you think about this or that or the other? Now, I have been meditating for 40 years, probably close to 50 years. And that's always been a very central part of my life. And, of course, I've studied all kinds of texts and books and what have you with teachers and so on. So a lot of that thing, but so many others have also done. But what I really have learned, especially with the writing of this other book, A Love Story, is that we are pursuing something that simply can't really be articulated or described and therefore can't be taught. For instance, if we talk about leadership, we're desperate for leadership, and yet we can't even describe it. We don't know what it is. We can't name it. Everybody's got their own definition of it, but we would never probably get any agreement on what it is. And when you think about the way we teach leadership, we teach it like engineering, and we teach it like, here's a checklist of 10 things that great leaders do, and by the end of the seminar, you should have it buttoned up and be able to be a great leader. And it's just not like that. So what I've realized is that we're doing so many things that don't work, and we're like sheep copying each other doing those things. And this last book, which was not a business book, but taught me something as I was writing it, which is that the secret of a great romantic relationship is exactly the same as the secret of a great organization. So if you were to ask, what are the characteristics of a great leader, you'd probably get answers like vision and decision-making and building a team and motivating everybody, having a strategy, all those things. But if you were to bring all that stuff to your personal relationship, your romantic relationship, it wouldn't be worth a nickel, would it?
No.
And yet, what are the things at home? Well, what makes a great romantic relationship would be like compassion, and listening, and integrity, and respect, truthfulness, love, passion, and compassion, empathy. I mean, these are the words, right, that we would probably use, and more maybe. Well, why don't we do that at work? What's the big deal about doing these things over here in the workplace and these things over here at home? It doesn't make any sense. We're human beings in both places. Why don't we do one thing that we know works and do that everywhere? Because the one thing that people would say to you in the workplace is, it's not working. Leadership is broken in Wall Street, in Downing Street. It's broken in Europe, in Brussels. It's broken in corporate life. It's broken in healthcare. It's broken in the Roman Catholic Church, in the academic system. You name it. So we keep doing the same thing over and over again and wondering why we're getting such terrible results.
I completely agree with what you've just said there. That's very, very powerful. Wow. Okay. Now, I know we've got limited time in this interview. Let's just go straight to... we're going to go back to the spark and the flame and the torch. Let's just go to a love story. With your partner... just tell us a little bit about your partner, if you can do, if that's okay, just to share a little bit about who she was.
Well, she was an angel, a spiritual being temporarily around on this planet, lending her beautiful energy to the world for a short time, and then God called her back because he needed her elsewhere. We were married for 30 years, never had a fight in all that time. She was just the magic of my life. And 2 years ago, she passed away. Broke my heart.
Yeah.
And I wrote over the years a lot of poetry for her, just for her eyes only. And after she passed away, I decided I'd pull this out, have a look at it, and see if it would make any sense at all to publish it. I don't see myself as a poet. I'm a business leader and a business teacher and advisor. And that's where my strengths are, and that's where I have a reputation, where I operate globally, and so on. So this poetry thing is completely off the chart for me, and yet it was a private thing that I had done. So I decided to dust off these poems, polish them up, write a narrative around them, around this wonderful relationship, and the book ended up being called A Love Story, an intensely personal memoir. And it describes the journey of how we met and how we parted, and everything in between.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that's not easy sometimes to bring that back up, but I mean, I know you're in a better place than where you were before. Of course you are, but it's still ongoing, I can imagine. And I'm not saying these things to get you upset. I'm just saying, it's you're a human being, So now that's incredible. Not one argument. Now, do you think that her being in your life made you the person that you were, from the perspective of what you've got in your life as well, through all the years that you were together? Without her in the background, would you have been as strong as you are?
No. She was a wonderful contributor and partner, thought companion, as well as, of course, a romantic companion. So, no, she was my soulmate, and absolutely transformed me from where I was to where I am today. And hopefully, as I get into a new relationship, I will bring the gifts that I learned there into my next phase of my life.
Yes. And do you feel that you're a bit more ready now to start moving on? Do you a bit? Do you feel that you've given yourself permission for that?
Yes, I think that, as I said, this book helped me understand better. Just writing it helped me understand some of the things we've been overlooking in leadership. But the other reason why I wanted to write it, and I think this is so important, is 55% of marriages fail.
That's right.
And of the remaining 45%, 2/3 of those are marriages of convenience. In other words, they can't afford to split, they can't afford two houses,
so
the
true.
kids at school, and all kinds of reasons why they're hanging together.
Yeah.
So that leaves us 11%. Now, 11% of all the marriages end up being successful, passionate, loving relationships, lasting relationships. That's a disaster. And I want to bring a message in this book to people to say, this is what it takes to have a fabulous relationship. I've had an amazing relationship for around half of my life. I know something now about relationships. I wanted to share that. And I think everybody can have it, and everybody deserves it. And so this book is really aimed also at people who are struggling to find a great relationship or are in a relationship right now that isn't perfect and they'd like it to be. And I think reading this book could help a lot that way.
Oh, it's so true what you say. I see it all the time. These relationships of convenience, these horrible toxic relationships where they're almost obsessed with each other, and that, you know, it comes to that really, or one's obsessed more than the other sometimes, or the one's coming from fear, or there's an abusive side taking place. And it's, you know, you being a deeply conscious spiritual person must know that there's something karmically going on sometimes in these relationships. There's things being worked out that we're not on our surface level aware of.
Yes. And, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? So let's just take a journey, 5 years, let's say. Two people fall in love with each other. They're totally inspired by each other. They're crazy. You know, they're doing all kinds of intense things together, and they're passionate together. 5 years later, they're fighting, and they're in court. Now, did these people change? I mean, these are the same people at the end of 5 years as they were at the beginning, excepting that they have changed how they behave. You know, it's quite possible that you could dial the clock back and get those people to behave the same way they did when they were at the beginning of that relationship. All it takes is the act of sitting down together and saying, we've lost it. Let's get it back.
But then what is the reason, in your opinion, that some of them just break away and they can't get to that point to even talk like that? Or they've been at that point many... Sure, go ahead.
We're lazy. It's hard work. It's easier for us, isn't it, just to walk away and walk away from the pain than it is to say, we need to roll up our sleeves and do the work here. I mean, maintaining a fabulous relationship isn't a walk in the park. It takes work. And I don't mean it's difficult or hard or ugly work. It's not. It's beautiful work. But it takes energy. You've got to commit to it. You can't just, you know, leave the toilet seat up every day, even though your spouse is saying, please put it down. But comes a time when you need to say, if I want this relationship to work, I need to put the toilet seat down.
Sure.
Those simple things, right?
But what about abusive relationships? You know, we've got to get out of that. That's not, you know, that's something that most times can't be fixed.
I don't believe that. I think that everything can be fixed. It's a matter of will. If you want it to be fixed. I mean, let's suppose you and I have a fight. We can choose to continue fighting, or I can say to you, hey, Kevin, this isn't productive. It isn't taking us anywhere. I don't want that kind of relationship with you. I want a loving relationship with you. Will you work with me with that?
Okay. Then I kind of do like what you're saying, right? Because it actually, both spiritually and consciously, it actually makes a lot of sense. You are right. It's always one of the people in the relationship that's not wanting to do that, either wanting to grow up, wanting to take responsibility, or they want to be in a caretaking relationship but looked after and not look after themselves in some respects. There's always something that's lacking, I suppose we fall out of love then, don't we?
Yes, we do, and that's easy to do. Somebody does something that irritates you, and instead of listening and discussing it and being compassionate about it, we get angry about it. Anger is one of the first places where things go off the rails.
Well, let me ask you...
You asked about meditation before. That's a good time to meditate.
Oh, yes, of course it is. Was your wife, was she very spiritual, in a sense? Was she quite... Yes, she was, right. Okay. Yeah. So, because I noticed in the book that you did talk about twin flame, which is quite an intense kind of relationship, a twin flame.
Mm-hmm.
Magical, but, it's special. It's special.
Well, it's exactly right. Here's the option, right? I painted a picture a moment ago of a 5-year journey where you start off passionately in love. I, for example, I still have the telephone messages that I would leave on her answering machine that she saved over 35 years, which I now still have.
Right, yeah.
So where I was making silly love songs on my phone to her. I mean, going back in the days when we had little tapes,
Yes.
In the voicemail equipment, and we still have those. Those are little things. That's where we work so hard, to impress each other and to impress on the other how much we love them. Well, That's the starting point. Don't you think at the beginning of 5 years our mission should be, that's wonderful, can we make this better? Instead of which we go the other way. We say, that was wonderful, it's never going to be like that again. Let's go downhill now.
Yeah. Well, I never understood cheating in one sense, why people do that. I mean, if you're going to start, doing that as well, you may as well just be honest and not be in the relationship. And you can't, all this deceivingness and all that rubbish, it's, you know what you're really doing? You're deceiving yourself. You don't realize that at the time.
Yes. Well, of course, in Hollywood, they have these things called open relationships, right?
Never works.
Yes. Well, and it's whatever turns you on, I suppose. But for me, that's okay, but it isn't a passionate, loving, committed relationship.
No.
I think by nature we tend to be monogamous, and I think that you're sending a message to your loved one. You're the only one for me. I love you so much, nobody else is interesting. That's an important message for the other person to hear.
That is. Can I ask you, when you first met her, was it sort of instantaneously? You was like, I love that, this is the one? Or did it take her just a few sort of, times to meet up, just to, you knew something was intense about it, but was it right, this is, or did you take your time? That's what I'm saying.
Well, it's an interesting question you've asked. People ask me all the time, especially people who are divorced or you're single, how do I find a mate? And my answer is, don't do the internet thing. It works for some people, and I have friends who have been successful with that, but that's probably not the best route. It's iffy, and a lot of games get played on the internet and so on. And don't do the meet market thing at that bar and so on. That's not a good idea either. The best way to find a mate is to figure out where your passions lie, and then find someone who shares those. So how I met my wife, Tricia, was skiing. My passion is skiing. I ski 100 days a year.
Right.
And we met, she fell over on the ski hill, and I picked her up, literally.
Right.
And I blew the snow out of her ear, and then she skied off, said thank you and goodbye. And I spent the rest of the afternoon chasing over the mountain trying to find her. And eventually I did find her.
Right, yeah.
And then we hooked up, and we never looked back. I was single, and I had lots of girlfriends on the go. And basically she said, get rid of them, or I'm gone.
Yeah.
And that was like, I know a good thing when I see it. I think I better get rid of all these other women, because this one's very special. And that's how we hooked up.
Well, do you think in that moment, that's good advice what you've given there, and thank you for sharing your story of how you met, but do you think in that moment you were just flowing, and that's why it happened? You were flowing. There was no, I must meet someone. You were just going with the flow.
Well, absolutely. Actually, I was very committed to being a bachelor.
There you go.
So I was very certain. I wanted to live in a log cabin in the woods with a beer fridge beside me and be a writer.
But you could say that you were flowing at that time. Would you be aware that you were just going with the flow, do you think?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that is the way I am anyway. People always ask me about goals and so on, and I think goals are very off-putting, honestly. I don't think anything other than modern humans have goals. I don't think squirrels have goals. I don't think dogs have goals. Birds don't have goals. They want to get a lot of food and make sure they have survival and so on, and that may be considered to be a goal. But I don't think they say, on Thursday I'm going to plan to be here or there.
No.
They don't even know what Thursday is.
No. Some people do this, don't they? They meet someone and they're not, initially physically attracted, but everything else ticks the boxes.
I would say gong rat. I would say that you have to tick all the boxes. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the statistics of failed marriages happen. We compromise. When you compromise, that thing you've compromised on is going to come back and haunt you.
Yeah. You can't, It's true, yeah. I mean, if you have to be, I mean, they say, I mean, looks don't last, do they? But they do, in the eye of the beholder. That's in love as well, and that's
absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah, I think that when Trish was 30, she was very different than when she was 60, but still spectacularly beautiful.
Absolutely. But yes, you're probably right there. You probably need all the boxes ticking. I mean, yeah. But it's
why would you settle for anything else? You don't go and buy a car that has no steering wheel.
No, you don't. No, that's right. And sometimes, all the signs can be there that have brought people together. Because I do believe in that. There are signs that bring people together, yet they may be brought together for different reasons. It's not always for romantic reasons.
Right. And then if it grows from there, for instance, it could start with an intellectual relationship, and it could then grow to, let's say, an athletic one, or a spiritual one, or a physical one. But all of those need to be right.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I really, I appreciate your honesty, and I appreciate your input as well. There was no better time. Well, there was no right time to do this book, and up until, I suppose, Patricia's passing. That was the catalyst to do this book, wasn't it? Really.
Absolutely. I mean, I would never have written this book. It didn't exist. My next book would probably be another leadership book, because that's what I do. That's my art, as it were. But this was a book that called to me, and I had no commercial interest in it. Most times when I write a book, I have a very clear awareness of how this will play out as a workshop, as a keynote speech, as a consulting program, and so on. This book I just wrote from the heart.
Do you think, though, in your experience of great leaders and great CEOs, and just from your own, experience as well, that really it's a lonely life sometimes doing that type of work without someone by your side, without that special person? But everything's in its own time. But personally, I'm single, and I'm, on this journey on my own. It would be lovely to have that right person with us. But, and I'm a guy that now goes with the flow. But you can't force these things. You are where you are, and you've just got to, whatever arises, love that.
Yes, but you have to turn your radar on. If the radar isn't on, you won't get discovered. So you have to make and live a life where it's clear that you're available. Some people go through life where they basically say, I'm not available, and therefore they are repelling opportunities. But you never know where opportunities are going to show up. And I don't mean to say that you need to be promiscuous or, have a loud hailer that says, hey, I'm available. But I'm saying that don't do anything that essentially sends out the wrong signal.
Yeah. That's kind of like in the realms of law of attraction. That is, in a sense, that what you're putting out, you're going to get back. Yeah,
that's right. Karma.
Yeah, that's another word for it. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's always worth remembering. I do love what you had to say about actually when you get into what you love doing, people will enter your life just as you loved your skiing. Look what happened there. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. You have to get out there as well, and
for Tricia and me, that was our beginning connection, right? So we both, you can see how many things fall into place. So if you're a passionate skier, there's a chance that you're going to be athletic in other ways too, but you're certainly going to be physically fit and aware of wellness and well-being and fitness and so on. So all of those boxes get checked, right? And now you can start looking at where are the other intersections and interests. because that's a cornerstone for us, and always was. So, we were kayakers, mountain bikers. We did a lot of backcountry hiking and so on, and skiing, of course. So that picked up a major part of our life and our interests, much more than, say, going to concerts or going to plays or whatever. So those things are very important to check up, because that's where you get your inspiration. I'd buy a new pair of skis and say, hey, you know about these? And, we'd be educating each other and growing together and so on. A lot of passion around those kinds of things. That's what makes for a fun relationship.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love how this book does tie in. It really does to some of your previous books, especially the Spark, the Flame, and the Torch, in some of the key areas.
Eventually.
Yeah, which is, who would have thought that? But that's it's so true. One thing on people's mind as well, or in people's reality, is their creation of wealth. And I'm just going to go back to this as a sort of final bit, is that it's true what you said earlier, that you cannot think of wealth when, as your first point of call to create. You've got to put what it is your passion and what it is that you're able to provide service-wise to the world, and concentrate on that. And people struggle with that as well. There was something leading on from that. I've just lost my thought there a little bit, but it's also to do with, that's it. Money is energy, and it's a sort of signal of your worth as well, though, isn't it?
I think that we have it backwards, Kevin. I think that we think I'll focus on making the money, and then I can do everything afterwards that I love. But actually, it's the other way around. Exactly, it's the other way around. I should do what I love, because I can't help making money if I do what I love, because when I do what I love, I'll do it well. If I do what I don't love, I won't do it well. If I do what I love to the highest possible standards that I can, how can I not make money? It wouldn't really matter what I did. I mean, there are people doing all kinds of strange things, like making sock puppets for dogs and, just strange stuff. But if they do it really well and they love it, they will make money at it. It works like that. That's the wonderful law of the universe.
Yeah, and I just got to reiterate what you said as well, personifying your words completely here, so I'm probably going to get it wrong unless I listen back to the interview now, was that you can always find a side business of what you're doing as well. You may do what you love, but there may be something on the side that you didn't consider, that was staring you in the face, that was the reason you did what you did, that's going to now bolt on to what you're doing, and there you go.
Yeah. I had a client who was a CEO of a billion-dollar business, and the person who was responsible for pulling in all accounts receivable was in his office one day, and he asked her, what do you love doing? And she said, well, it isn't collecting the accounts receivable. And he, of course, that was her main job, and she was very good at it. He said, well, what do you love doing? She said, I love playing the piano. So a lot of CEOs, this is a hospital, a lot of CEOs would say, well, there's not many piano-playing jobs in the hospital. But here's a creative man who said, okay, so here's what I'll do. I'll buy a used piano for you. I'll pay, like $300 or $400 for a used piano, and I'll put it in the atrium of the hospital. I'll pay for your music lessons. How be you play music for us every day in the atrium for all the people that come in, all the patients, and all of the staff who like to listen to piano music. And brilliantly, in that move, what he did was he spoke to her calling and her passion. He inspired her because she knew that he was keen on who she was, not just the job and getting the job done, and that he cared enough to do a small thing. It didn't take a big investment, but on the other hand, a big thing for her. This is how we close the circle, right around the desires of people on the one hand and the gifts they have and the needs of other people, and put them together in such a way that we have a creative result.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what would you say then is an important message to the audience?
Well, I think the important message probably is, why don't we understand the importance of love and the courage it takes to bring love more fully into our lives. It reminds me of that old joke about the wife who says to the husband, "You don't tell me you love me anymore." And he said, "Look, when we got married 25 years ago, I told you I love you. If anything changes, I'll let you know." I mean, that is just simply not a good way for us to work together. What we want to know is, are we loved? We're just too immature and fragile to own up to that. But if you ask any worker anywhere, are you loved at work? Would you like to be loved at work? Is it important that you feel loved at work? They say, absolutely, of course. I don't change my spots as soon as I go to work. I'm not a person who wakes up at home in the morning and says, I want to be loved and I want to be loving. Now I'm going to work and I'm going to lie and steal and cheat. I want to be loved there too. And we need to wake up and understand, if you want to really inspire people, make sure you know they're loved.
So true. Well, I'm, sorry that we've run out of time here, Lance, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's been great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we've come to an end on today's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on The More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests by going to themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.